Hello, and welcome to Diminishing Returns, the podcast where three movie buffs pitch their own sequel ideas to films while simultaneously trying to remember how they got into this situation and why they thought it was a good idea in the first place. In anticipation of the movie Jason Bourne, today we're going to be talking about the Bourne film series, which mostly stars Matt Damon as Jason Bourne, who, after being plucked out of the ocean with amnesia in 2002's The Bourne Identity, spends that film and a further two sequels beating up spies, getting embroiled in government conspiracies, and trying to remain the focus of an incredibly shaky camera in order to find out his true identity. The series was noted for its gritty and realistic approach to the spy action genre, with Damon praised as a great new post-9/11 American movie hero. Despite a trilogy of critically acclaimed, financially successful, and creatively inspirational movies, Damon opted not to star or even cameo in the franchise's fourth installment, The Bourne Legacy, which instead sees Jeremy Renner taking on the role of Aaron Cross, who similarly gets embroiled in conspiracies, shaky campfights, and general post-9/11 analogies in order to understand more about the government super soldier program he prescribed to. It's also worth us mentioning in this preamble that at a few points in this podcast we refer to David Cameron as being the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. This is because the episode was recorded before the Brexit referendum, and in the political turmoil that we're sure the government wishes they had Chris Cooper, Brian Cox and Ed Norton on hand to suppress, we ended up with a different Prime Minister whose name I'm not going to say, as I think this episode has been dated enough.
This episode contains spoilers for Fast and Furious, the 2012 London Olympic opening ceremony, Comic Relief 2015, Batman and Robin, and some other stuff that's redacted for the sake of surprise. And of course, the Bourne Identity, the Bourne Supremacy, the Bourne Ultimatum, and the Bourne Legacy.
Hello, welcome to Diminishing Returns with me, Alan.
And me, Calvin.
And myself, Saul.
And this week we're looking at the Bourne films, and we'll be pitching our ideas for sequels or reboots or however we decide to approach it. So, Bourne, what do we think? We're just generally talking about Bourne films. I just watched them all in preparation for this. I've seen them.
All
I've
four?
I've seen the three original ones previously, but I've watched them all in the last couple of weeks. So yeah, if we want to have a full-on discussion about all the Bourne films, I'm ready.
Okay, well,
I'm good.
I watched the first three a while ago. I then watched the Bourne Legacy in preparation for this. The fact that I hadn't bothered to watch it ahead of that probably tells you what I feel about the franchise. But, Calvin, generally, how do you feel about them?
Well, it's interesting because I'm a massive James Bond fan, so it's obvious to see where that series influenced Bourne, but then how Bourne has now influenced Bond going forward. So
was the Bourne Identity before Casino Royale?
Yes.
Okay.
It was 3 years before then, and it was clear that film sort of changed the landscape, and I would say not just for espionage films, but for sort of Hollywood action entertainment in general. So I think it's a very influential. I think it's a very influential first film. As a series, I don't think it's.
I actually quite enjoy the first one, the Bourne Identity.
It's like, it's wrapped up really nicely at the end. It's contained. I don't think you needed to make more. And I know there's a book series and there were plenty of books written, but
the weird
film
thing
is not
that
related to the book really at all.
No, that's what I understand from listening to the director's commentary. He just they just threw out basically everything. And
Well, yeah, that first, it's got a really great high concept as well.
Yeah.
Like, spy, can't remember who he is. And it's such a great plot. And then the second one, it's like, now he's just sort of fanning about.
And I think that's the thing. I really do not. I know the sequels, the two proper sequels, are generally regarded as being better. And they're really very highly thought of, or at least the third one, the Bourne Ultimatum, seems to be. I watched them both and thought they were dreadful. Not dreadful, just boring.
Yeah.
The second one was just nothing, and then I persevered because I heard such good things about the third one, and then it just utterly let me down. And
it was just like, this is the same thing again.
Yeah, and I think the reason that I don't care for them is that there's, like you say, quite a self-contained, nice little story in the first one. There's this enigma of who is this guy? Why is he a super soldier? Like, why is he so why is he this perfect man with all these skills that he doesn't even know that he has? You want to find out, and after that story's played out, it's just kind of it's people hitting each other and the camera's not on a tripod.
It all goes very Manchurian Candidate and conspiracy, and I think I don't mind the third one. The second one frustrates me because there's almost no reason for it, because Bourne was perfectly happy just living an inconspicuous life somewhere with Franca Potenta. He was perfectly happy living a quiet life with her, and it's only because the government went after him that he starts, I think that's one of my main problems with it, in that I guess, everything is personal to Bourne, but in the third film it's basically just he's out for revenge. The second film is basically he's just running and they're chasing him. And there's nothing else much really going on. I know that there's this whole Manchurian Candidate style conspiracy going on about how they trained these super soldiers, but...
Is it Paul Greengrass who directed the sequels?
Yeah.
Yes.
But not the first one?
Yeah, it was Adrian Lyne did the first one.
Okay, see, I've always kind of...
I think it's Doug Lyman.
See, I always assumed for whatever reason that Paul Greengrass directed all of them, and it was his thing, because it's kind of his style is now so closely associated with those films and seen as the influential style that was taken by films like Casino Royale and countless others. And then I found out he didn't actually direct the first one, the only one I actually enjoyed. And I've ever since kind of been realising that maybe I really don't like him as a director. And because of that, I was kind of excited to actually get around to watching the Bourne Legacy, because I thought, well, maybe I'll just enjoy this new director's take on fun action stuff. It turns out that's not the case, but I did find it interesting that I don't know.
Oh no, I mean, Paul Greengrass is really... I mean, Matt Damon didn't want to come back for any more unless he could do it with Paul Greengrass, and it's like those two are sort of the driving creative forces of it now, which I find interesting to say that Greengrass wasn't involved at all in the first one.
He didn't create that style. He was essentially copying it. But I mean, that is his style. He's made it. And they hired him on the basis that he wasn't an action director.
I feel like the style I feel like Paul Greengrass goes too far with it, frankly. I feel like it works better in the first film. There's a bit of shaky camera when it works, when it complements the scene. The two sequels are just incomprehensible at times. It's far beyond. It's like, this is a film, you've been given millions of dollars to shoot this. Make it look nice. Don't just make it look like some idiot on a smartphone.
It's one thing when it's an action scene. There's a scene, I think it's in the third one, where he meets up with Franco Potenta's brother, and he's telling him that look, your sister's dead. And it's a really sort of quiet scene. They're just sat in a flat, and they got fucking Michael J. Fox on the camera. This is a tranquil scene. You do not need a shaky camera.
Yeah. That's exactly my point. I don't remember it that well, but I feel like the first film handled that balance better, because it didn't bother me in the first film at all. No. But the sequels, it drove me mental.
Yeah.
There's a fight scene in one of them. I think it's the third one. I can't tell who's fighting who. I couldn't tell who's who. And one of them, they're not even the same skin colour. So when it's confusing, it's how do I not know who's beating who up? It was the shaky camera really started to wind me up.
I actually made some notes whilst I was watching the fourth film. I thought I'd take kind of viewing notes.
The Jeremy Renner one.
Yeah.
I actually enjoyed it.
Okay.
Before we go into this, I know this is not. But I wasn't
Wow.
expecting to. I think I had really low expectations going into it. But bear in mind, I watched them all within about a week. So I'd just come off the back of these two very boring Bourne sequels. And it felt like a really good kind of rebirthing of it, like a shot in the arm. It still had the same sort of tone, but it had a bit more of a Hollywood sheen. They made it a little bit more expansive, and it kind of had a new character in which they could bring a new sort of story arc into it. It was so much better than just seeing the same thing again. And it wasn't an amazing film by any means, but I found it really watchable. I really generally hate Jeremy Renner.
Yeah.
And even his scene was sort of palatable. I mean, I wasn't expecting to like it, and perhaps my expectations were low. So
I mean, I made these notes kind of expecting it to just be this is gonna be. I'm gonna come up with loads of great, bits taking the piss out of the film, and it's gonna be great fun. I've only made 5 notes, which I think it's just testament to how dull and uninteresting a franchise it is. There was just nothing to talk about.
It was too. Yeah, you could take half an hour about that film. Easily.
I'll rattle through them, unless you want to go through the other films first. I don't know.
I mean, the first one, I'm not sure if I could tell you the difference between the second and third one. If you like, I'm not sure which one.
I can't remember what happens at all in the. Like I say, yeah, like what you're saying.
And I watched them literally a week ago. But the first one, the one thing that I really think it doesn't need this is when him and Franco Potente they start getting it on, and it's like it's always a bit crowbarred in, isn't it? It's like I wasn't feel particularly necessary.
I think it's handled better than in a lot of films like that, especially like the ending and listening to the director's commentary on the DVD, which is actually really good. He's a very sort of laid back guy, and he's very open about where they disagreed and where they diverted and where he didn't have enough money to do certain things. But they say at the end of the film, when Matt Damon goes and finds her and she's in that little beach house somewhere, they don't kiss, they just sort of hug, because that was the start of their relationship. Because he just sort of talks about how he hates it, how through the course of these sort of films, people just become a couple pretty much instantly over a couple of days, and that was like the start of the relationship, which I quite liked.
Yeah. So the fourth one, Legacy. My notes are as follows. So the first note I made was a sequence where the guy shoots up a science lab. So that's how far into it I got before something interesting happens.
That is my favourite scene in the whole film.
I put fairly engaging. Only bit that is. My sequel is arguably a continuation of that spiritually. So that was the one scene I quite enjoyed.
What I like about that, I guess, is that's pretty brutal. It's just like people being mown down. Like, to put that into a Hollywood film, you don't get that too often. They are on the edge a little bit. It makes it a little bit more interesting, doesn't it?
My next point was I really like the lack of shaky camera compared to the previous two. Then I put Jeremy Renner looks stupid with facial hair.
And without.
Yeah. Scene in car improvised? ? Who's they? Who? Bullshit. Bullshit is what I've written. It just felt all of a sudden like they were improvising the film when they picked up that woman and they were driving away and they started talking, because there wasn't a massive amount of dialogue, I suppose, in the film.
Well, which bit? Sorry, go
on. When Jeremy Renner and the woman whose name I forget,
Rachel Weisz,
are driving away from
after
something.
He's just rescued her from her house.
Yeah.
I think wasn't that Rachel Weisz acting?
Maybe.
I think that was what you see there was good acting in a film where there wasn't much good acting. So it seemed to stand out.
And then and my last point is half an hour of people driving motorbikes at the end. Action scenes should be choreographed. They shouldn't just be footage of driving.
Well, that was my complaint with all of them, really. They put these... In fact, in general, with car chase sequences of all types, a car chase sequence needs to be 35 seconds and no more. I'm bored.
The thing is, I do enjoy a good action sequence, but for it to be an engaging car chase, for example, on motorbikes, you've got to have people driving up the side of lorries and doing spins and figuring out how to lose the other person. Maybe they, slam on the brakes and the other people go flying past them, or I don't know. You've got to have more than just they're driving and then they're driving and then they're driving some more and
it was the repetition. I think it's pretty much every film has a car chase, and watching them all in such a close proximity just made me really think about. And they all pretty much end the same way, which is a crash, and the antagonist in the car is sort of trapped there, and then Bourne gets out and either shoots the guy or doesn't. And I'm not sure if we're supposed to draw parallels between all this, but
definitely that having a car chase is something I picked up on in terms of you got standard procedure for Bourne films. And it's definitely it's an attempt at being to some extent a realistic car chase. So they don't have something like driving off the back of a truck and then flying flips in the air.
But then I'd argue, why bother?
Be interesting to watch.
Or like you say, cut it down to 30 seconds.
It just needs to be.
And you can do it realistically and just have more of the psychological, the intelligent interplay between the characters, where they try and outsmart each other, and they know a shortcut, or they know they can sneak into this motorbike parade taking place down the street. I mean, obviously they're cliches, but that's why you write films. That's why you hire a writer and pay them millions to write your film. You don't pay them to write. They drive the bike down the road and they chase.
All of the something else that is repeated throughout all the films, obviously, is the whole like government conspiracy things, and it gets quite. It is pretty sci-fi in the Bourne Legacy, isn't it? When they all have these serums, and
I
it's
didn't
sort of...
remember that as strongly in the previous films, but it is alluded to, isn't it?
I don't think it's that prevalent in the first two, but in the third one they sort of go down the mind control route.
Right.
And, like Albert Finney's got him in that room, and he's like
brainwashing him.
Brainwashing.
Well, the thing, that super serum stuff in Legacy wasn't good. It wasn't. They tried to handle it in a kind of like, let's put some science around it, make it sound like it didn't quite work. Yeah, in the previous ones, like taking an army recruiter, then breaking them down and building them up as a soldier is like, you're not actually, tinkering with their DNA.
Yeah,
it works a lot better.
It just becomes a bit too sort of super soldiery for me. And something else that is in all of the films is when they talk about the asset, they always have an asset in whatever country to go and kill Bourne. It's always some sort of Eastern European looking man with a sort of very sharp haircut, just like lying on a hotel bed, just perfectly still, and then his phone goes, and then he picks up, looks at it silently, and then
that's
goes
it.
out.
Well, in
that's
my
in every film.
in my pitch, I've referred to that as a non-speaking stuntman. Because obviously, you just get a stuntman because they need him to fall off a bike. Or and then don't trust him to speak. Or it's Clive Warren, who just speaks right at the end.
You guys might know more about this than me, but what I find interesting is that it's a franchise where they recast, got a new lead, and that was presumably because they didn't want to bother making any more Jason films.
Well, I think it was more like just Matt Damon just didn't want to do it.
Did he just want a break, or did he always did he never want to come back? Or
the end of Legacy is an obvious setup for a sequel. I mean, because there's no real resolution.
Oh yeah, but I mean, it's not an obvious setup for a Jason Bourne sequel.
Oh no, that's what I mean. I think they intended to carry on the Jeremy Renner character.
Yeah, and for a while they were going to. Like, the new film that's coming out is just called Jason Bourne, and by all accounts, Jeremy Renner isn't in it at all. But for a while,
I've seen that their plan at the moment is to kind of do the cinematic universe thing. Give us Jason Bourne, this film that reestablishes him, and then give us the crossover event with Jason Bourne and with Jeremy Renner, who no one cares about. Yeah, Aaron Cross.
They should have just done that with Bourne Legacy. They shouldn't have called it Bourne. Because it's so distracting. It's like having a Bond. It's like following up
the Cross Legacy.
It's like following up Sean Connery's last Bond film with, and now we're going to follow 008.
Yeah.
It's like, who wants to know 008?
I've prepared a list of franchises that have done the same thing because I thought it was quite unusual, but I looked into it and there are a few. There's a precedent for it in Hollywood.
That was interesting because I couldn't think of any when I was...
Really?
Yeah, no.
Mr. Bond superfan.
No, but they've recast the actor. They never gave you a new character.
Oh. Okay, yeah, no, you're...
Because
to be fair, they brought... But I found it weird that they got rid of Connery and then brought him back and all that. But no, there are films that do it with characters as well. If we're looking just at the actors, there's all sorts of examples. Jim Carrey and Jeff Daniels in Dumb and Dumber, followed by the Jim Carrey-less sequel, followed by the sequel where Jim Carrey agreed to come back. Things like that. But Fast and the Furious.
Yeah, Vin Diesel left for a while, didn't he?
Went away. He went away, and then they got him to agree to a cameo at the end of, I think, the third one, in return for giving him the rights to Riddick. That he was so desperate to get off them. And then he came back for the films down the line.
Yeah, which franchise worked out better for him in the end?
Yeah. And then, going back to our previous episode, Universal Monsters have a lot of very incestuous casting between their films. Bela Lugosi was Dracula in Dracula. He was then succeeded by Gloria Holden as Contessa Maria Zaleska, aka Dracula's daughter. Then Lon Chaney Jr. in Son of Dracula. Then replaced by John Carradine as Dracula himself in both House of Frankenstein and House of Dracula. And then Bela Lugosi came back as Dracula for Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein.
Well, I mean, the point is with the Bourne films, they're called Bourne.
Yeah.
Matt Damon is Jason Bourne, and by not just... I mean, they could have just put Jeremy Renner in the role and called him Bourne, and maybe they would have got away with it. But by doing this, they've said, no one but Matt Damon can play Jason Bourne.
Yeah, you got to put the Bourne name on it to sell it.
That's the franchise, I suppose. That's,
Can we talk a bit about Jeremy Renner?
Yeah.
Just because this is
If we have to.
this is, I think, the most fascinating thing about Bourne Legacy, and I think I'm a bit fascinated by Jeremy Renner because I
am
think
a little bit because he's the blandest leading man in Hollywood.
well, Bourne Legacy came out at a time where I think whoever, like, you know, when every now and then Hollywood just decides, oh, this is a leading actor.
Jai Courtney, I think, was the most
Yeah.
recent.
Exactly,
guy like
Sam
that.
Worthington.
Yeah,
he was in that at the time.
Chris Pine.
Yeah.
for a while was
And this is just one of those where it felt like he was leading, like, that Hansel and Gretel thing, and he was in the Avengers. He was really exposed around this time.
Yeah.
And now I don't really know what he does. He doesn't really have his action franchise or anything.
I don't get him.
And I think it's quite telling that for the fifth film in the series, they were all set to go ahead with him and Justin Lin for the fifth one, and then as soon as Matt Damon agreed to come back, they were like, "Oh yeah, no."
He's also going back to the Avengers. He's the one actor in that group that I suppose I'm not that into Chris Evans either, actually, but I like Captain America as a character. I guess it buffers it. But I mean, most of the actors in those films are great. I love Robert Downey Jr. I love Scarlett Johansson. I love Mark Ruffalo, particularly. He's brilliant.
And
and then there's just Jeremy Renner in the corner. It's like, what?
I mean, he's also got a shit character in the Avengers.
Yeah.
Like him and Scarlett Johansson is.
I was going to say, so Scarlett Johansson, and she kind of. Black Widow's alright in those films.
People still actually want a Black Widow solo film. No one wants a Hawkeye solo film.
And if they ever do make that Black Widow solo film, I imagine it'll have a lot of Jeremy Renner propping it up. That'll be his closest.
I think he'll have a lot of Scarlett Johansson's arse in leather trousers. That's great because that's the only thing they've got to sell it on.
Okay, so Alan, what's your take on what the sequel should be?
Well, I tried to do a really sort of straight take on this one. I try to do it legitimately. So I sort of looked at what I liked about the Bourne films and what I wanted to carry on, and I liked, as we've said, the more realistic sense instead of as opposed to Bond and all that sort of thing, a lot of hand-to-hand combat and all that sort of stuff. And so, as I said, the fourth one actually was a bit of a shot in the arm. It really helped. I think a bit of a invention of what was working, and the fact that the guy who directed it was the writer of the previous films, and so it's kind of got it's got the legitimate sort of tie. He's obviously genuinely cares about the franchise. Speaking of keeping things realistic, for example in the first one, I really like that when it all starts kicking off and Franca Pretender just gets kind of dragged into it, she really freaks out. At one point she just throws up because it's just all so stressful. I like that she was that is a pretty genuine reaction. Yeah. But then it kind of sort of ruins it slightly because every now and then something happens where they'll just shoot someone in the middle of a train station. It's would you do that though? It's a pretty obvious murder that loads of people saw. It's this is supposed to be shadowy organisations. But what I did like about it is the government is always portrayed as the bad guy, and they're always up to something. Well, that's quite interesting in a mainstream film. They're just trying to kill him. They just want to get rid of him. But what I liked in the fourth one, in which it was Ed Norton basically leading that team, is that it really that felt much more sinister and genuine than the previous ones, because the previous ones it was always a personal thing. It was I trained the guy and now I need to stop him kind of thing. Whereas with Ed Norton, it was really he doesn't know anything about it. It's just I'm the cleaner and my job is to make this disappear, and it felt really good like that, and it felt much more genuine. There's people like that, and because it removed this kind of personal story from it, which always feels a little bit forced. And I always think the government and the military is impersonal. It's we need these things to be killed. And so they have all these agents that they've spent years training and loads of money on. And they go, this is too much of a risk now, we need to shut it down. And they just kill them all. And I think that's really brutal, but that feels a lot more genuine.
Yeah.
And so I really liked the way that I actually preferred that in the fourth one than in the previous ones. I did the obvious thing, which was a sequel to Jeremy Renner Bourne, Aaron Cross. So I just wanted to come up with a really realistic spy drama adventure plot. So this is what I've got. Okay, so at the end of the film, Aaron and Marta Shearing, who's the Rachel wife, at the end of the film, they basically get on a boat and that's the end, and they don't really resolve it. But he's had his viral whatever, so he's going to stay like that. I did like that Jeremy Renner was playing a gibbering simpleton. Now that's good casting. You should do a prequel where it's just Jeremy Renner as an idiot trying to get into the army. Even they don't want him. I like that. they escape. Basically, they run away. They go and try and hide somewhere. So they go to some Central African nation. I'm not going to really name anything because I don't know enough about the politics of Central Africa, but somewhere that's sort of torn with civil war and all sorts of shit going on. So they try and trying to do some good with the skills. Marta Shearing, she's sort of medically trained or whatever, so she can be like helping with the Red Cross or Médecins Sans Frontières. She's doing good. So Aaron Cross, he's sort of stuck there, and he's like helping carry things and like bringing water and stuff, and he's just like, oh, this is really very good use of my skills. I'm a bit bored now. But if they're in this sort of civil war, they'd be living with this community, say, and they get attacked by some rebels or whatever. And so he then finds his sort of position as he can build a little militia and he can train them to defend themselves, kind of like a Rambo style kind of thing.
Yeah.
So we can have some action scenes where maybe they go and try and steal some weapons, or they're kind of just defending the town or whatever, that kind of thing. Just throw some action in there. Now, if you wanted to put in a more prolonged kind of subplot, you could have some people are kidnapped, including Marta. She gets kidnapped and then they have to rescue them. And that sort of thing. But basically all this stuff they're doing gets him noticed. So the CIA are suddenly like... And obviously the CIA are involved in all this because they're, fueling the Civil War. So he's sort of back on their radar. Things I noticed about the Bourne films that you got to get in there, they really like... And not so much in Legacy, although they did do it at the end, but they really like claustrophobic action. Like, again, really close in shady camera, but they're always in like major city centres, really, densely populated areas. And then in every film, he has to escape over the rooftops. He has to climb onto the roof and escape. Car chase, there's always a car chase, which it didn't look like they were going to do in Legacy, and then it all sort of they packed in the last 20 minutes in Manila. Yeah, he fights with a non-speaking stuntman who is another trained assassin. But I'd like to say, instead of him just sort of like set up like a proper kind of set him up as a proper villain, like not really with any great character, but rather than him just fighting with him and beats him, like he keeps coming back. He keeps coming back about 3 times.
Yeah.
I thought I'd probably make it a woman as well. It was maybe a bit more interesting because they're always men. And in the previous films, they have some female agents but we don't see him do anything real action, but we see him getting killed or whatever.
No.
So just to throw that in there, make that a little bit different.
I like the idea of one of them being through the whole thing, because I think it's in like the first one. They've got like 3 different guys, of which Clive Owen is one. And I think Clive Owen, maybe it's just because it's Clive Owen that he sticks out more than any of the others, because I actually know who he is. But I liked him because he was a little bit more of a... All of the others are the same kind of, non-speaking stuntman, whereas he's actually, wears the glasses, he's a sniper.
The professor.
He's not like, he's not just some like brute who's going to have a fight in a small room. He's like actually a little bit different. And I like the idea that they would train people to have different sort of skills.
So all the while, I haven't really focused on the Ed Norton shady government bit, and I'll tell you what I preferred in the fourth one for the previous ones is it felt much more genuine. Like in terms of they're trying to find, they knew where they were and they're trying to get satellite imagery of the area, and they're like, oh, well, we haven't got satellite imagery, and so they have to go to Canada and like get their weather imaging, and then it's like a really shitty view, and they go, well, this car, they pick up in this car, and then they drive that way, so we know kind of what direction they're going. Whereas in the previous film, they would have just gone, satellite imagery, enhance, and then they would have like got the number plate off it. So it felt more genuine in that as well. And I think that is definitely a sign of the times where you could do that in 2002 and people were like, oh yeah, but you can do that. Whereas now people, the audience, are like, they're too smart.
Increased resolution.
Yeah.
I mean, they literally do that in the first one.
Yeah.
They get a number plate. But here we can have the government, or the CIA, or whatever the government representatives are.
Illuminati.
They're in Central African unnamed nation, fueling the Civil War. They're providing weapons for this to try and get a coup going because they want to put a puppet dictator in there so they can control the oil reserves. Now that is legitimately basically what the CIA do. So that's really legitimate. And what I like about the Bourne films is that they don't shy away from stuff like that. They do engage legitimate political situations like that. And they don't pull their punches particularly. And they don't represent the government in a particularly pleasant way. So I think that'll be very, very apt. A bit of character development throughout the film. Aaron Cross and Marta Shearing, they kind of get thrown together in the first film. I don't think they'd get on, really. I don't think they'd really like each other. So they're kind of stuck together, but they're certainly not going to fall in love or anything like that. They don't really have anything in common. So that could be a good sort of general sort of characterization subplot, and specifically with Aaron. Well, you could play it for laughs a bit, like having like a bickering couple, or just generally like have that as a general drama and tension between them. But for Aaron Cross, he was this simpleton who then became a kind of fighting machine. And so now he's at a stage in his life where he's like, I have to figure out who I am now. Can't go back to what I was before because I was a gibbering idiot. I don't want to be a killing machine, even though I have now super serum strength and intelligence. So he's really kind of discovering himself as a person. And I think that's something you could put through the whole film. And generally, as that character, that's what it needs for whatever sequels you did. Again, in terms of his relating to this other character, that's what he's trying to figure out. Actually, my title for it was The Bourne Evolution, which was kind of like tied into that, really. The action climax, blah, 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 all that's going through. The climax is Cross, he breaks into like some sort of government building and he steals all the files and they figure out all the secrets, what they're doing, who they're giving weapons to and all that. And it turns out that the CIA are trying to assassinate the current president of this country, to facilitate this coup. So the big final piece will be Cross stops the assassination attempt, but it's very clear that there has been an attempt. And then they can reveal that the government was behind this, and everyone will be like, oh my God. So obviously the government are trying to stop them. But Marta Shearing, she's the doctor, she doesn't want to live this life on the run. So she takes the files, she goes to the press, or she goes to whatever, and she becomes the whistleblower. So she's like the kind of... Bradley Manning, someone who reveals these secrets, and then the government are they go to some sort of non-extradition country, and the government are trying to kill them. So that's like the end of her story. But Aaron Cross, he can't do that, that's not a life for him. He has to be out in the world being an action guy. So he sort of just probably gets on a motorbike and drives off into the sunset. And that's to the next sequel. So that's it, really. I think I tried to sort of engage with the political aspects of it, make it relevant to kind of current context.
I enjoyed that element more than most of what's in the actual films. In your pitch. So,
but they do that in those films, and so I think I was trying to kind of.
It'd be a nice thing to really embrace, though, like really make that the focus, which is kind of what that felt like. Because, like you say, it is there in the others, but it's always kind of more of a subplot,
vague, isn't it?
Can I take this opportunity to try out a new segment that I want to introduce to the show called Corporate Whore Corner? I just want to establish it now so no one can call us sellouts if we ever feel the need to start advertising. So, Alan, have you ever bought stamps? That's a pain, isn't it?
I haven't bought stamps for years.
Do you like Kevin? Do you like buying stuff online?
Yeah.
You should check out a website.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Just stamps. I'm like everyone, so I haven't bought a stamp for years because no one mails anything anymore.
Just no one can criticise us down the line.
Okay.
Genius.
Could you tie it in more relevant?
Have you ever wanted to send hate mail to Jeremy Renner, but the old-fashioned way, so that he'll probably read it instead of just deleting the email? Okay, so
mine isn't quite completely stupid, I don't think, but it's because Batman v Superman has sort of legitimized A-level movies, like just putting V in the title and having everything. Because it used to be like Alien v Predator or whatever. So this is JB v JB, Jason Bourne versus James Bond.
Of course.
Because obviously they've influenced each other as series, and I think, you could...
I wouldn't be surprised if there's like a comic book out there that's been made that already did.
Probably.
There's a line of James Bond comics, aren't there? And you get all sorts of like Batman versus Alien versus Terminator comics. It's crazy.
Yeah. So, despite this would never happen because obviously all the rights are all over the place. But let's just say, in an imaginary world, we would start the film in London.
Ding 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 ding.
We have the. I never even thought about that.
I was going to say, is this a Bond film? Is this a Bourne film? Is it kind of equal parts?
I think that this is a Bond film with
Jason Bourne guest star, right?
So we start in London. and the British Prime Minister is going to give a big address in front of all the world leaders at a very important conference in London. We have an introductory sequence of a bunch of his security detail, and we hop from like one to another, all talking to each other on the wireless comms, like "Oh, Roger" and all this, and we hear a woman's voice on the comms, and it's Judi Dench, because this is not set.
I can't believe I didn't realise that they have the same initials. I can't believe that's just in head.
And Judy's all like, "Oh, where the bloody hell is he?" And she's all, Bond, report." And then we cut to an empty conference room, and there's a comms on the desk, and then a hand comes up and grabs the comms, and Bond gets up and his shirt's all ruffled, and then he says, "Oh, smooth sailing so far, ma'am, but it could get messy." And then there's a lady under the desk, and he's obviously bunked off. He's but duty calls, so through this, this is to establish that this is not Daniel Craig's Bond. This is
We're going back.
Well,
Are you casting someone new?
You'd probably have to cast someone new in this, but in my mind it would be to contrast with Jason Bourne, who is a very humorless, dour character. You would need to have a Roger Moore or a Pierce Brosnan, someone who's a bit lighter. That's a good idea. Yeah. Have
you got any ideas casting wise? Anyone out there you'd go for?
I didn't think of it actually. Do you have any suggestions?
Tom Hiddleston. Because he's not a very actiony guy, is he?
No, he could do the charm, the smarm. So we learn that Bond is in charge of the Prime Minister's security for this very important conference happening, and I'm not quite figured out what, but it's some kind of super important deal or treaty with the USA. And Bond thinks that this job is beneath him, and he's making quips and whatnot. And then suddenly there's sniper fire, and the PM is shot dead just as he's about to sign the treaty with the USA, and Bond follows the sniper, and there's a shaky camered, choppily edited car chase with Bond in his gadget-laden Aston Martin and the assailant in a sort of crappy Eastern European-made car. But they're evenly matched. Anyway, the car chase ends with Bond incapacitated, and he sees the face of the sniper, and it's Jason Bourne. And Bond is pretty beat up, and he drops unconscious. Then we have a pre-credit sequence. This is a Bond film. And then we open a few years later, and we see that Jason Bourne is going about his business, and he's now living with Julia Stiles' character from... We didn't really talk about very much, but she is a constant figure throughout the series.
Yeah. Never got why that character was in it.
It's
just sort of exposition, or it's sort of an escape route out of a couple of things, wasn't it?
Yeah.
But very underused, really.
Yeah, to say it's Julia Stiles, and I think she's a fine actress.
Do you know what? I kind of liked it that it was just the same character that they just sort of like, oh yeah, he's got this mate who keeps helping him out. Kind of. Someone on the inside. It worked, but it did seem a bit weird that it was Julia Stiles. Yeah. Because even at the time, she was pretty well established. Yeah,
mostly in 10 Things I Hate About You and those kind of teen rom-coms that she was good in. So he's living with her now. They're living an inauspicious life in a houseboat somewhere, and it's all very low-key. We just see a little bit of their daily business just to catch up with where they are. And then we move to London. And Bond is a bit more serious now than he was before the incident, because that's he's no longer MI6's top man, because as far as, British Secret Service, one of the worst things you can do is have a Prime Minister die on you. So he's only got vague memories of this assailant because he's bumped his head, so a little bit of amnesia just to sort of give him a little bit of that Bourne thing. And he's only really getting low key assignments now, and he really wants to play in the big leagues again. But Emma's refusing to give him the benefit of the doubt. When Moneypenny turns up at Bond's house with a sneaky covert mission for him to do in order to restore some of that former glory, which is to terminate a rogue American agent who the US have outsourced the killing of because no one in that damn country, no matter what training, no matter what steroids they've had, they just can't kill him. So they're like, well, fine, someone else can do it, because they still want him dead, even though they should know better by now. So, maybe we just leave him alone and we won't, interfere with us. But Bond accepts, and on seeing the picture of Jason Bourne, it all comes flooding back. Oh, he's the one, so the stakes are personal now. So Bond heads over to whatever Eastern European country or African country or whatever that Bourne is living in, and this bit isn't worked out, but we have some espionage and action and car chases around this point. This is where we get all the versus stuff out. So we have the pair of them fighting.
Do they meet and Bond's like, who on earth are you? And he goes, the name's Bourne, Jason Bourne.
You just kind of spoiled what I was going to say next. But yes, yeah. So that happens, and there's a confrontational scene in which Bourne claims to have no memory of the incident with the British Prime Minister, but he's got no memory of most things that happened. So he's thinks, oh shit, did I actually do that? Because that's a pretty bad thing if I did that. Stuff happens here, and Bourne might actually convince Bond that he doesn't know anything. But so Bond decides to bring Bourne back to the UK alive. Meanwhile, news of this has been trickling down the Secret Service bodies in the US and the UK. Moneypenny has gone missing, and M is having talks with Joan Allen from the Bourne series, and she's now the head of the CIA, so she's sort of Judy's opposite number. And it's all very heated, because if it's true that Bourne was the one to kill a British Prime Minister, then fuck, it could be all-out war between the UK and the US, and when, has that ever happened recently? It's especially sensitive right now as the US President is on British soil to mark the anniversary of the Prime Minister's assassination and open up a new memorial. So Bourne and Bond return to the UK with Julia Stiles, and Bond is told to hand over Bourne to MI5, which he's apprehensive about, but word of this has come from the Prime Minister, so he has no choice, but he's somewhat conflicted. Anyway, Bourne is to be interrogated by the head of MI5, who enters the interrogation room. Then, in a plot twist worthy of 24, the head rips off his face, and it's Jack Bauer. So we have the third spy JB in the story. And Jack explains that there's a massive terrorist conspiracy afoot because it's 24, so there's obviously,
Does it shift into real time from this point onwards?
Yeah, it does. And there's a massive terrorist conspiracy afoot involving the US president. And the pair must expose him as a DNA-altered Osama bin Laden, because he went to the same clinic as the bad guy in Die Another Day went to. If you remember that one, where a Korean man has DNA replacement surgery to become a white man, to become Toby Stephens, Maggie Smith's son. So he's had that, so, tie into the Bond films. And the conspiracy itself revolves around a Spectre-style plot to inaugurate a war between Britain and the United States. So we've effectively got a villainous organisation here that's sort of half Al-Qaeda, half Spectre. And the whole thing is the plot for this particular day is to assassinate the Queen of England herself at the memorial service where she's... Now, things get a bit vague here because I've not quite figured all this out, but all three super spies must now work together to expose the terrorists, whilst fighting against agents of their own affiliation. So they're all against like CIA and MI6. And the trio end up finding a lone gunman who is the one who was going to take out the Queen. And they discover that it's Ethan Hunt, Tom Cruise from the Mission Impossible series. And after a cool fight sequence, they manage to convince him of the truth, but are surprised that he was duped so easily. And Hunt explains that the problem is that now he's, getting older, and these self-destructing messages, you can't replay them once they've done themselves. So he was like, oh, well, I don't remember everything of it, and I just go for the gist of it. And everyone agrees that they're all getting really old now, because everyone's really old, apart from... And then Bond just stays quiet, because he's young but always old. Anyway, the day is saved here in, wonderful action sequences. Moneypenny is rescued, Julia Stiles is rescued, and we can throw Jack Bauer's daughter in for the hell of it, because she was always getting captured in 24. And the film ends with Joan Allen, and the Vice President congratulating the gang on a job well done. And then they all rip off their faces, and it's Johnny English. So, underneath all of them.
J.E.
And that's it.
It rhymes.
I'll admit that when I was writing this towards the end, I think I did just sort of get a bit silly. But...
I mean, there's
it probably
it got very complicated. I think I got lost halfway through.
It's not very well thought out.
There's a vague precedent for 24 crossovers. Are you familiar with the? It never actually happened, but the Die Hard 24 crossover that was on the table for a short period. Die Hard 24/7.
Oh.
My understanding is Bruce Willis is a big fan of 24 and was like, yeah, those guys should team up because Bruce Willis has lost his fucking mind when it comes to Die Hard. He doesn't know what he's doing anymore. And I'm pretty sure it was Kiefer Sutherland who basically said, no, let's...
that surprises me.
Let's work on building the 24 franchise as its own thing. I think he wanted to make some 24 movies. Did they ever make a 24 movie?
No, never. It's been talked about for years. And then they eventually came back with like a limited series, which was 12 episodes each an hour long. So the real-time thing sort of went out the door.
Yeah.
Well, no, it was real-time until 10 minutes before the end, and then they suddenly skipped forward 12 hours to justify it all happening in one day. And now they're doing a rebooted series, but he's not even in it anymore, and he doesn't want to be in it. And it's sort of...
If you're going to do it as a film, you do it in real time, like some very simple plot.
Yeah.
It takes place over 98 minutes.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question, actually, which is a bit of a tangent,
Yes.
but you'll know. What is the history in James Bond of representations of the Prime Minister?
Ah.
Because isn't there one where it's basically not in name but Thatcher?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you never see her face?
Oh no, we see her face. They got
she's-
some woman who was an impersonator of her on TV at the time, and they got someone to play her husband as well. It's really awkward. It's the end of For Your Eyes Only, and it's like at the end of the film when they have Bond is having sex and then they bring in some dignitary. It's like, oh, what are you doing? And then I guess that they thought, oh well, if we're going to take this joke to its natural conclusion, he needs to be talking to the Prime Minister. So they put him through to the Prime Minister, and she's all like, oh hello, and then. He was supposed to be communicating with her through a watch, and then he puts the watch on like a parrot's stand, and the joke is that Margaret Thatcher's having a conversation with a parrot.
That's hilarious.
But that's the only time we've ever... In some of the Roger Moore ones, they refer to the Prime Minister as, like, oh, she'll have our guts for garters. So it's very much the real world Prime Minister, I guess.
So if in this version of your film, would you get David Cameron and then have him killed? And then you'd have to have everyone like upset by that, though, which would be difficult to pull off.
I suppose I was...
You'd have to have a fictional Prime Minister that people like.
No, you could get away with, like, you just have a montage of, like, Brixton street parties and up with, like, twats in suits, getting all upset. You can pull it off with it.
But I think that there is something in there which I probably didn't highlight about... because Bond is all about Queen and country, like the establishment is what we're protecting and all this kind of stuff. Whereas Bourne is very much the sort of opposite of that. It's a very more anarchist
You know what's
the man.
interesting with going off on a tangent from portraying the actual Prime Minister? When you look at how they portray the president in films, what they used to do to establish, oh, it's a fictional president, don't worry about it, we're not bringing politics into this, was they had a black president. and
This is absolutely unrealistic.
Yeah.
which was often Morgan Freeman.
Yeah. And they can't do that anymore.
Mm.
So... What's going to be the standard go-to, especially given the likelihood of a female president very soon?
A Hispanic.
That's too far.
A robot.
Do you know when they had the Olympics in London, they had that thing with Bond and the Queen?
Yes.
Is that the most depressing thing you've ever seen? It's just like Daniel Craig who forced into this. The Queen obviously didn't give a fuck about anything. She was sat at the Olympic opening ceremony with her face like a slapped arse. Didn't care. And like she has to pretend. It's like when they do something for comic relief and they get like the
Tony Blair.
the
Am I
Prime
wanted?
Minister. Yeah, it's like, oh, for
But
God's
that's
sake.
why I loved it, because it's pretty much like... I mean, you can't really go further than that, can you? It's
You've got like a 6'2", like 250-pound stuntman in a dress, parachuting out of a helicopter.
Has James
pretending
Bond
to be the Queen.
Has James Bond ever taken part in comic relief? I know Doctor Who has.
Yes. There's been a few instances. I think when Daniel Craig first became Bond in like 2006, 2007, they did have a little sketch. I can't remember exactly what it was, but one of the more recent ones was they had like David Walliams did a sketch where he like dubbed over.
He's in love with being Bond.
And it was like they had like an interview with Roger Moore, and then they dubbed Sarah Millican over his voice, and the joke was, oh, they don't sound anything like they do on. Because that was the joke. Sorry, Daniel Craig.
That sounds like top tier comic relief. Yeah.
The joke was none of the Bonds actually sound like themselves. They need to get other actors to come in and do the voice. And the joke was, oh, David Williams does Daniel Craig's voice.
Okay.
Okay, good concept.
Should we move on?
Yeah.
What about you, Sol?
We're doing Bond. We start talking about Bond again.
So yeah, I kind of just started thinking about stupid pun names that I could come up with. So I've got some rejected ideas that I'll just rattle off. I thought about Natural Born Killers, which was going to follow a pair of romantically involved assassins sent to kill him. A Star is Born, which was going to be a meta-comedy about the making of the film based on the exploits of Jason Bourne. Baby Born, in which a baby's left on Jason Bourne's doorstep and it then gets sort of entangled into a shaky camera action fest. Have you ever seen those Jackie Chan films where he'll be like fighting in a museum and like he'll keep like jumping over to like stop a vase falling over and stuff like that? I was thinking it'd be like that. He's got the baby on his back, but he's got to like keep it safe while he's fighting him.
Well, they did that in Batman and Robin. I just watched that. We'll get onto this. But yeah, they did that gag in there.
A whole film of that. And then I got really worried just now when you started talking about yours, because our concepts are incredibly similar.
Is James Bond in yours?
No.
Oh.
James Bond.
But when you were leading into it, I thought we'd done the same thing.
Oh.
My film's called Freddy vs. Jason.
Brilliant.
And basically, the way I saw it was that the Bourne franchise, it's one of those... They're all kind of those boring films where everything's really mundane and they should put a robot or an alien in it just to make it more interesting. So I thought I would fix that. Jason goes underground at the end of Ultimatum, goes hiding. So I figured, why not go to Camp Crystal Lake, hide out in a cabin there. So he keeps hearing strange noises and experiencing things to suggest that someone's following him, watching him. He assumes that like a spy is on his case. He sets some sort of a trap, comes back to it. Someone was clearly there and caught but escaped, suggesting that they have a huge size and strength that shouldn't be humanly possible. That night he goes to sleep. He's plagued by bad dreams. He's being chased by this stalker. He's woken by the noise of someone trying to get inside the cabin, goes to the door. He's attacked by Jason Voorhees carrying the severed head of Freddy Krueger.
Nice continuity.
As we last saw them.
Yeah, from the very end of Freddy vs. Jason.
Spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert.
Cheers, guys.
And they have a shaky camera action fight. I like the idea, similar to what you did, of both films kind of maintaining their style and then throwing them together. It'd be like in kung fu movies where they take on like just a gigantic guy who just kind of stands there and they're doing all these kind of...
There was an American basketball player.
Freddy's head's just taunting him from the side. Jason Bourne manages to escape and finds a way of contacting the outside world outside the camp. The phone lines are down and all that usual shit, but like shoots a flare in the sky or something, and then Jeremy Renner sees it. He's working with... I couldn't be bothered figuring out how it's going to work, but one of the spies, I figured it might as well be him, sees it, rushes into action to like help him. Jason Bourne hits a dead end whilst trying to escape, and Jason Voorhees catches him, restrains him somehow. Freddy is just barking out orders, telling Jason what to do. They've teamed up. And then Jason smacks him on the head, knocking him out. Then Jason Bourne is back in a dream world and he's being chased by the stalker. It's obviously Freddy Krueger, with a body again. They run around, do some horror stuff. It can play on Jason's psychological problems and hang-ups. I quite like the idea that he's got loads of missing memories, so he can kind of just, fall into chasms of nothingness within his own mind. I figured he might use that to trick Freddy, lures him into a lost memory or something of that nature where nothing makes sense. Even Freddy can't control the dreams. Then Jeremy Renner shows up and is able to free Jason, sort of splashes water on his face or whatever, brings him back round. Freddy's really pissed off, and so Freddy and Jason Voorhees work together to chase after them. They have a big action chase, car chase sequence where they drive back into civilization. They probably do some parkour, like over the building tops or something. Make their way to like an old factory or something like that. Whatever like cliche location is on hand. And Jeremy Renner and Jason Bourne team up to have a fight with Jason Voorhees and kick him into like a big vat of chemicals or something. And then they can leave, walking into the sunrise, holding hands. But they forgot about Freddy's head. It didn't fall into the vat of acid or whatever it is. It's still alive. And then the government, like, bad men from the Bourne film show up and find it when they're securing the area. And, like, over the credits rolling, we can see them studying Freddy's head and using, like, technology to create a new like wave of dream warrior super soldiers and training people to carry out assassinations and target people in their dreams.
Amazing.
That's wow. You two both came up with some serious mashups.
I mean, I think mine makes more sense.
Mine makes as much sense as the average Nightmare on Elm Street or Friday the 13th film. So if you positioned it as a sequel to that rather than...
No, I think, like it's like what you mentioned earlier, there is a precedent for, Freddy versus Jason versus Batman or,
Yeah, they will do anything.
Yeah,
there's no shame.
Some of these comic series are really like,
Yeah.
Terminator versus Christopher Columbus is one, I think. Something like that.
For a while, they were trying to get Freddy versus Jason versus Ash off the ground, Ash from Evil Dead, and Sam Raimi was like, no, piss off. But, I think the comic book got written based on the screenplay that was never produced, but like for a while, they were just trying to get the franchise carrying on in that direction. In fact, the original idea, or one of the original ideas for the ending of Freddy vs. Jason was going to be them both fighting each other in hell, having killed each other, and then Pinhead just walking out and going, hey, what's going on, guys? But I think the rights holders sort of were like, no, again. And then, Robert Englund retired from the role and they rebooted it and managed to make it even worse than the original Nightmare on Elm Street, which is quite impressive because it's a dreadful film.
I think that Freddy vs. Jason is probably the best film of both franchises.
I would go with New Nightmare. The meta one where he comes into the real world, which I actually really like.
Yeah, I love it. I know it's got a bit of a bad rep.
It's like the blueprint for the Scream movies.
Oh yeah,
and I recommend that anyone who likes Scream should really watch New Nightmare because it's basically Scream but with Freddy Krueger.
I got a bit distracted while you were doing your pitch because I was just trying to think of film puns with Bourne in it.
You got the good ones?
There's one Bourne every minute.
That's
you need.
I think I got
90
most
people
of them.
playing Bourne.
I nearly went with Born to be Wild, which is going to be something about like Jason Bourne killing a lion or something. But I thought 3 was enough. Yeah, it's interesting that we both went for
the verses.
Crossovers.
Yeah.
Based on the title as well.
Yeah, I know.
Well, speaking of crossovers, next week we're doing some sort of Batman mashup thing, Superman or whatever it is. What is it?
It's Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice.
That's what we're doing a sequel to.
Oh right.
What's the film that's coming up?
Oh, Suicide Squad.
Suicide Squad. Which is everybody in that?
The Joker and Batman are in it, and a variety of DC villains, mostly from the Batman camp, I believe.
It's in the what they're not calling it a cinematic universe, the DC.
Are they not?
It's called their extended narrative, or it has its own name. We'll find out for the next podcast.
We won't. So that's what we're doing next week. Thank you for listening to this episode. If you'd like to talk to us or each other about the pictures you've heard or your own ideas, go to our Facebook group, which will be called Diminishing Returns. We're on Twitter as well, and all sorts of other social media outlets. We're generally available for all your whims and fancies, except not if we're too busy watching films for the next pictures. So thank you. That's been this week's episode, and goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.